Welcome to the Feria Techcast, where we bring you all things science, engineering, technology, and innovation. Today, we are joined by Sara Gallagher, president of the Persimmon Group and creator of the Big Dumb Question newsletter on LinkedIn, a recognized expert in PMO leadership and strategy execution. Sara helps leaders and teams get strategy of PowerPoint into the real world. She's a frequent speaker, author, and instructor, and she works with organizations of all sizes, from Fortune 500 powerhouses to fast moving startups to unstick clogged project pipelines and finally move big ideas forward. Sara, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and I am equally as excited to have you here. So, Sarah, you are the president of the Persimmon Group. So, where you help leaders get strategies of PowerPoint into the real world. So, for our audience who may not be familiar, so can you give us a quick picture of what that looks like in picture and set the scene for what it was like stepping into that leadership role?
Sure, absolutely. So the work that we do is kind of threefold. We help companies with the development of strategy, but the part of the business that I love and that I do every day is strategy execution, right? Because strategy development, I like to say, kind of happens in an artificially simple context. People go to a 2 or 3 day corporate retreat. It's hard because you're trying to make decisions in the face of unknowns, but ultimately it's a clean project, right? But then it gets to strategy execution, and that's where the rubber meets the road. And there are 1,001 things that can go wrong, right? From not having a culture of execution and a sense of urgency, to not having the right structure or roles, to not having right sized, processes to get things done. So what I do is I come in and I help companies sort of diagnose what's going on and figure out, first of all, what are the quick wins, right? What are the things we can do now and alleviate a lot of the pain and unclog the pipeline? And then what are the longer term things that they need to do? And I do that kind of on a case by case basis, right? So you won't ever hear me talk about a 5 step proven process or or acronym or frameworks, right? It's not that I don't know of those, but where I love to work is in the messy space, right? Where you create what's right for the company and its size and its goals.
Amazing. So, Sarah, you talk about getting off PowerPoint and into the real world. So, for our audience of engineers and project managers, what does that process actually look like on the ground? So, like, what's like the first tangible step to take?
Yeah, absolutely. So, at the let's start with the organizational level, right? Um, what you're looking at in terms of building an environment where your biggest ideas actually happen is you're looking at your organization as a sort of system. And to me, there's 6 parts to that system. And when I use the word system, it's important because in a system, if you change one thing about it, it can have unpredictable results on the rest of it, right? So, I look at in the center strategy, and then around it, people like skills, process, which includes the under the table informal way that work gets done, the tools, the structure, and the culture. So, what does that mean to an individual project manager? I look at a project team as a sort of microcosm of the organizational system, which is harder, right? Because you have to swim in the water of your organization and its limitations, but you also are in charge of building your own sort of micro environment around your project. So again, you're looking at what is the culture that we've developed within the team? Do we have a culture of having a meeting even when we don't need one? Do we have a culture of pushing deadlines over and over again and never really talking about the elephant in the room, which is that we're not meeting those, right? You're looking at how your team is structured. Is it clear where one role stops and another one begins? So you're looking at it, I think, at the organizational level, which is where I spend a lot of my time. But I think project managers and even just technical people on the team have to think about the almost mini company that they're building within their company.
Interesting. So, I'd like to ask, in your opinion, why do so many brilliant strategies, especially in tech, fail during execution? So, is it a planning problem or a people problem or something entirely different?
Yeah, well, so my official answer is it depends because every company is different, but I won't cheat my way out of the question. For me, the way that I would liken this is sort of like if a patient came into an emergency room, right? We all know the first goal is to stabilize the patient. And then you can diagnose what else is going on in more specific terms. For me, when I see a strategy that's not getting off the ground, almost always the part that's unstable is the prioritization. So I mentioned earlier that strategy planning happens in a sort of artificially simple environment. And part of that environment is sort of unbridled optimism, where executives look at all the things that could possibly get done and all their ideas. And, they walk out with 20 projects for a team of 8 to do in 12 months. And that sets everybody up to fail right at the beginning. And it affects every part of that system that I talked about earlier. So I think, the first thing that I think gets in the way of strategy actually happening is picking the right number and the right complexity of initiatives to work on. And one thing that's really interesting about the discipline of project management, your listeners will probably be very familiar with Agile, right? And that really was a system, an operating system, if you will, right? That was optimized for rapidly changing, rapidly growing priorities. And it said rather than try to decide in January what we're going to do and then define it and then go deliver it and try to have blinders on anytime someone asks us to do something new, right? That hit real limitations, especially in the tech space, because technology doesn't move that slow. So we had to have a way that said, what if change is the feature, not the bug? And I think that there's a lot to learn from agile approaches, even if your team isn't quote unquote doing agile. And a big part of that comes from like the part that I would coach executives is have a backlog. Have a list of the things that you're working to get across the finish line. Understand it's going to change, but borrow a page from Agile and make that transparent to everybody. Don't try to tell me that, one project is high, one is medium, one is low priority. No one wants to say their project is low priority. So actually rank order it. Put the thing that matters most at the top, the thing that matters second most next, right? Force yourself into those hard decisions. And if you're a PM or a tech person on a project team, you don't feel like you have clarity of priority. You have to have the courage to raise that up and say, where does this fall? And if you're telling me we're number 5 and, resources are limited, here's what that's going to do to our ability to deliver, right? Would you rather us keep working on this project or would you rather us go help the project team on number 1 get that done faster? So those conversations have to be happening.
Oh, great. So, how can PMOs transform from being perceived as the project police to becoming true enablers of innovation and execution?
Yeah, well, the first place where I think PMOs have failed, and we're getting better, but, there used to be a lot of emphasis on best practice. I remember when I got certified back in, gosh, it was maybe 2010 or something. The exam to get certified, you had to memorize 49 different project management processes. That's processes. That's not documents you're supposed to create. That number was much bigger. And there wasn't yet an emphasis on sort of tailoring that to your organization. It was really presented as this is what you have to do. And I like to make a distinction between good practice and best practice. And here's the distinction. I don't think best practice exists, right? Because it's artificial, it's made up. It might work for most people most of the time, but that's how I would define good practice. So what PMOs did is and I still hear this all the time, especially from people who've never set one up before, is they looked at the PMBOK guide. I don't know if your listeners are all familiar with that, but that's the big fat book, right? That is a driving factor of the exam. And they said, oh, we need to make everybody do a charter. We need to make everybody do a resource loaded schedule. We need to have, clear project prioritization processes, and we need to, have this complex matrix, and everybody needs to score it anonymously, and then somebody's going to take a calculator and right? And it's not surprising that so many PMOs started to look like overseers, right? People who are traffic cops or, bureaucratic layers. So, how do we fix that? I think one of the things that needs to happen is a PMO needs to figure out where the pain is and then go solve that, right? So if the pain is there's not enough people on the team who really know how to run a project, go fix that problem. If the issue is that, we're launching projects but no one really knows what the success criteria are, go fix that, right? No matter what you go fix, know what the outcome is. What are you there for, really? And the answer is different for every PMO. So at a bank, that PMO might really be about making sure that any technology changes truly have good governance behind them. But if you're a startup, that's going to get in the way. So I think, to sum up, a PMO has to know what leadership values and what the strategy will need to succeed. And it has to ask the question, how can we help the organization achieve that strategy better than if we didn't exist? That's the core identity question.
Well, that's truly insightful, Sarah. So everyone's talking about AI, 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 like a buzzword, yeah? So what's one practical, non-hype way that project leaders can start using AI right now to improve execution?
Yeah. I think it is, if I'm thinking about individual project managers, what I'm finding is that there's two sort of categories of AI user right now, and the gap between them is getting bigger and bigger. So there's what I call the tips and tricks crowd. These are people who are using maybe a chat GPT or a copilot. They're very slowly kind of reading around about how to write a better prompt, right? But ask them about agentic AI, ask them about, predictive analytics and using AI for that, ask about sentiment analysis, right? They have really no idea how it works. Um, and so that, you know, technical know-how that is important, not only if you're doing an AI implementation project, but even if you're using it every day, if you're looking as a PMO about how to implement it, right? That intermediate proficiency is really important. But that middle is weak. There's not a lot of people who have intermediate proficiency. They're either in that tips and tricks crowd or they're out there posting on LinkedIn about where AI is going. And you literally have to type it into Chat GPT to know what they're saying, right? And there's not a bridge to get people from, hey, I use Chat GPT occasionally, to really understanding how it works and what that means for, checking its output, what it means for writing better prompts. You don't have to go to the internet, copy paste a prompt. You truly understand what makes a good one and you can create them, effectively. And that's just at the individual user, right? Companies have to be thinking about this, I think, really deeply on the non-technical side about the people implications, the adoption implications, the ethical implications. So it's a crazy world out there right now. And all I will say is if someone claims to know where this is all headed, you should be suspicious.
Okay, so looking ahead, what skills do you think will be most valuable for project managers and technical leaders in the next, say, 5 years to come as AI becomes more integrated?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And unfortunately, I hear a lot of really bland, sort of general answers to this question. So you'll hear people say, oh, we'll need to do more strategic thinking or soft skills will be more important. And, look, that's true. Those things probably will be more important. But I think we have to start really digging into what does that actually mean? What does that look like? Um, and I'll give you an example I think is a really good metaphor of what humans will need to do. I don't know if you've been banging your head against the wall of GPT-5 yet. I mean, probably so. Probably many of your listeners have too. It's so interesting, right? Huge difference from previous models in that A, it's not just a model, it's a router, right? So it's making guesses about how much thinking it should do about your problem based on how complex it is. And then the other thing you've probably noticed is it will jump right to the solution. It will not ask you a lot of questions to get the inputs to that output unless you force it to. And I think that's a really interesting metaphor for what AI at least is today and what it's likely to be in the future, in that humans, they're really deeply and intellectually familiar with the pitfalls, right? They're the ones who actually feel the stakes of a bad decision. They are the ones who know the right sort of process to get to the best output. And while AI will get better, right? It's not, at least LLMs, right? Their semantic maps are all about what's most likely to be connected to each other. Human beings are the ones who can draw more random connections and really think about the process to get something done and think very deeply and systematically about, you know, um, we can know in a meeting when a pitch hasn't landed. We can know in a meeting where there's sort of under the table disagreement that's going to surface after the meeting in a hallway conversation. That's emotion, right? AI can do sentiment analysis. It might even get really good at that. But I think the informal ways that work gets done, the way that we get to the best possible output, those are the skills that will be really important. So PMs right now who are sort of just typing in to like a GPT, write me a charter and here's a little info about my project. And then they take that and then edit it and they're done. That the relevance of that skill is going to go away really fast. People who say, here's my project, here's the risks I see, here's what the stakes are, help me really dig into, be a thought partner to me. Let's kick back ideas back and forth. I want this to go like an interview. I don't want you to give me a list. Like that's the type of critical thinking that we're going to need.
Fantastic. Sarah, you led through extreme uncertainty. What's your framework for making decisions and prioritizing initiatives when everything feels urgent and important?
Yeah, so I will I will say this topic's really near and dear to my heart. Part of what I do, about 60% of my daily life is helping companies with the strategy execution stuff, but 40% of my life is actually running a company. And I became president of the Persimmon Group February 28th, 2020. So if you're doing the math, right, that is less than 30 days from the point at which shutdowns started happening all over the United States, which is where we're based. And for me to be a brand new chief executive during this time of a small consulting business, which is notoriously feast and famine and subject to the ups and downs of the economy, we were having to make a ton of decisions with very little information and really high stakes. And one of the things I learned about leadership real early, and I think it's relevant whether you're an executive or not, is that real life decision making is often not between a good choice and a bad choice. It's choosing between a bunch of crappy options, right? And so, how do you do that? And, what I came to learn is really there's three ways to navigate that, right? You can choose the least crappy option, explain your reasoning, and stand by it. You could potentially stay with the problem long enough to come up with a good solution, right? Or you can make a for now decision, a small decision that will help you learn what you need to learn to make a better big decision. And so a lot of making a good decision is simply deciding how you're going to decide. And for us, that was a huge insight because as we looked at, decisions about every company at that time was thinking, do we have to do layoffs? Do we have to cut salaries? Do we have to do furloughs? We were in the exact same boat, a whole bunch of crappy options. But we were able to say, okay, do we feel like we really have to make a decision on this now? Right? What's the risk of deciding this now? At what point, financial triggers or what have you, will we have to make that decision? What are our guiding principles here? Is there something we can decide now and communicate now that will make future decisions better? Right. And so being able to frame that up was really key. The second thing that we did that I think has influenced me well past the pandemic is we started asking ourselves, and when we're facing any decision, five things. And again, I think this applies outside executive teams too. First question, what do we know for sure? Second question, what could we go find out with a little research? Third question, what is unknowable? Right? What is just simply not possible to know? And that's so important because it's easy to spin out talking about all the what ifs, right? So let's get down on paper what is impossible to know or not possible to know right now. Fourth question, what's the risk of making a decision now? Fifth question, what's the risk of not making a decision now? And I think these frameworks are really important because they can speed you up. If you've ever heard that phrase, slow down to speed up, that is what I've found to be so true. And I think tech leaders, CIOs, CTOs, and project managers can use that same framework anytime they're thrown a curveball, which is, as PMs will tell you, almost daily.
Interesting, interesting. Could you tell us a bit about your newsletter, the Big Dumb Questions newsletter? Tell us,
Sure.
what is it about? And what kind of information or stories do you share on the
Yeah.
newsletter?
Well, and I know it has a weird name, so I'll explain that first. It comes from an article in The Atlantic that I read called Stop Trying to Ask Smart Questions. And the journalist was noting that in his long career of writing articles for The Atlantic, the 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 articles that were complex and smart sounding were not the ones that got the clicks. The ones that got the traction were when he asked a question that everybody thinks they kind of know the answer to until they try to explain it to someone else, right? So, an example of an article that did really well for him is, why are rents so expensive? Simple question. Everybody kind of thinks they know the answer, but when you really pull it apart, it's so much, there's so much nuance there, and it's interesting, right? So, that made a big impact on me in my consulting career too, because I found then that a lot of my value was helping executives ask those things that feel too obvious to say out loud, but lead to a breakthrough. So the newsletter is my way of exploring a big dumb question every week. And it focuses a lot on strategy execution. You'll see me reference PMOs a lot, but there's a lot of issues where the problems I'm tackling are very universal. My very favorite one I've done so far is, why don't we all remember meetings the same way? And is AI going to make that better or worse? Right? So that's a good example of the kind of things that, that we pick apart there. So it's a LinkedIn newsletter. You can get to it by looking me up on LinkedIn, or I'm sure you could put the link in the show notes. But I love it. It's done really well in a short period of time, and I think it's because people want permission to explore the things that feel scary to ask out loud.
Oh, sure. So, what's one underexamined question that derails tech teams that you've addressed in your newsletter?
Yeah, good. You know, my very first one is called, Why Do Smart People Miss What Later Seems Obvious? And I love that one for tech people because, you know, I would say your listeners are probably among the smartest people in the world. That's just who the technology sector tends to attract. And what that means is, we can be overconfident in our solutions. We can also rush to solutions before we really understand the problem. And all those things your readers have probably heard or your listeners have probably heard about related to cognitive bias, right? Overconfidence, all of those things, I really think is doubly true of the world's smartest people. So, what I dig into in that newsletter is, what is behind that phenomenon, and can anything be done about it, right? And so that would be a really good one to start with, and it's literally the very first thing that I explored as sort of a kickoff to this big dumb questions concept.
Fantastic. So, for moving on, for a team that's already stuck, maybe a project is behind or a product launch is struggling. So, what's the first move you'd recommend to get momentum back?
Yeah, okay, so it takes 30 minutes. Here's what I would do. I would get the team in a room with a whole bunch of sticky notes, okay? And you take 3 flip charts and you put them on the wall, and one says start, and one says stop, and one says keep, okay? Then the next thing you do is agree together on what you mean by stuck. Are we stuck because everybody's morale is in the toilet and we're just feeling like this is a slog? Like, are we stuck in the sense of we're not hitting our deadline? So whatever the symptom is, right? Know what that is. And then what you're going to do is you're going to ask people, okay, let's look at, what do we need to stop doing in order to get unstuck? And everybody writes their ideas, one per sticky note, sticks them up on that board. Then you're asking, what do we need to start doing in order to get unstuck? And then the third one, which I think is often misunderstood, it's keep, right? What do we want to keep doing? A lot of people treat that as a, hey, let's celebrate what we're doing well, and that's fine. That's part of it. But really what that one's asking is, as we think about implementing the stuff in the stop and the start, what is it that we don't want to break as we do that? Right? What's working so well that we want to make sure there's not an unintended consequence of breaking it. And that should take you 20, maybe 30 minutes, right? And then you can debrief those and decide, okay, what are the top 3 things that we want to start doing and stop doing, right? What are those? Let's just execute those in the next 3 weeks and see how it goes. And then you save that list and you look at the next 3. And it should be, if you're doing agile, this can happen in your retros. But the key is don't bite off more than you can chew. Figure out what those high impact, low effort, low hanging fruit are, and just get those done and see what happens.
What does innovation means to you and how it relates to your work?
Yeah. So, when I talk about innovation, I'm usually talking to business people, not technical people. And I think that's important because business people use the word innovation. And it's funny, they automatically think about, the big tech giants and, what's Google doing? What's Microsoft doing? What's Elon doing? Right. But in a business context, I think we need a better definition. And the way that I talk about innovation is, if you think about ideas that are creative and ideas that are useful, it's sort of the intersection of the two, right? So you can have a creative idea that's crap. It's not going to do anything for you. And you can have a really practical idea that's not particularly creative, but it's going to move the needle. And I think innovation is sort of the intersection of those two. And I would add a third thing, right? Which is not only is it a sort of unique, competitive idea that's useful, it should feel a little uncomfortable. It shouldn't feel super obvious, like the obvious next step. It's something that should feel, a little further than you maybe naturally want to go. And so that's the working definition that I use when I'm talking to stakeholders. And I think that's important because everyone says they want innovation. But when it comes down to it, when you ask them to describe what it is, what they're just describing is process improvement, right? It's not particularly new, creative, and it's not particularly uncomfortable. So don't tell me you want innovation. Tell me you want operational improvement, right? And let's not you know, call it what it's not. And so I really challenge business leaders. If you tell me you want innovation, how much discomfort are you willing to tolerate to get that competitive advantage? Or you
Fantastic. So, finally, Sarah, for our listeners who want to continue learning from your approach, so what's the best way for them to subscribe to your Big Dumb Questions newsletter, or maybe generally just contact you to maybe ask 1 or 2 questions?
Yeah. Well, I think the easiest way is to follow me on LinkedIn. So Sarah is spelled without the H, Sara. Gallagher is three-letter words, gal, lag, and her. So easy enough to look me up. And then, when you follow me, it will ask if you want to also subscribe to my newsletter, or you can get to it from my profile page. So that's a really great way to follow me personally. If you want to know more about what the Persimmon Group does, I'm sure you can put our website in the show notes as well. But we are so passionate about this work and really helping companies and project teams move the needle on what they're trying to do and stop feeling stuck because it sucks to feel that way.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So, Sarah, it's been a really, really insightful and exciting conversations with you, and I am truly, truly honored to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation. I was really excited to join.
All right. So